Well, look, Navalny is a key threat to Putin's power in Russia. He was poisoned reportedly by the security services at the direction of Putin. He had been recovering in a hospital, actually, in Germany for the last couple of months, and knew that if he had entered Russia, that he would likely face arrest. Just a little over a week ago, he was arrested upon landing in Moscow airport. There was a makeshift trial and court hearing of some nature that presented him with the charging of allegations against him. And he's looking at prison for around a month simply for standing up and being a vocal opponent of Vladimir Putin. And he's actually quite lucky because the last key opponent of Putin found himself with 5 bullets in the back of his head.
Yeah, it certainly puts things in perspective, doesn't it? When you think about, our politics here in this country, when you look at what Navalny goes through over there in Russia, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And this is exactly why the Trump administration's approach to Russia was correct in compartmentalizing this U.S.-Russia relationship, meaning that they confronted the Russians where they had to and engaged where they could. Russia will always be a strategic competitor to the United States. The Trump administration understood that. Unfortunately, what we're starting to see with the Biden administration, with these series of executive orders that he's penned right out the gate on the Keystone Pipeline, banning fracking, or at least the transition into banning fracking and stopping the new licensing of drilling on federal land, signals but two things. One, even though Biden did not owe his election to the extreme left, he's now governing like he does. And it also replaces realism and pragmatism with appeasement. Banning this industry and harming the U.S. energy industry does nothing good to the United States except affects our revenues, our standing in the world, and it emboldens Putin, who relies on energy exports for 30% of his Federal Reserve. So Biden is not governing like a uniter right out the bat. He's governing like a very divisive and extremist right out the gate, and our foes are watching, including Vladimir Putin.
It's such an important point you mentioned there, because oil is a global commodity, and if you decrease the amount of supply, the price is going to go up, and the price of oil has to be above a certain point for Russia to even exist, and that's again, the game that Joe Biden is playing here. George, something else I want to talk to you about too. I know you've been tweeting a lot about the prospect of a Patriot Party. The Wall Street Journal also reporting that President Trump is discussing the idea of starting a third party. I'm going to talk about this a little bit with Craig Shirley coming up. Hasn't really worked out well in the past, but you seem to be in favor of this idea. Tell me why.
I'm looking at the landscape within conservatism around the country, and 75 million Americans voted for President Trump, the second most on record. So President Trump will have a formidable voice within the Republican Party, whether the establishment wants him to or not. Yet there's also this rift in the Republican Party today after this series of defeats on the national level. You also did mention that a third party usually does not attract as much attention or wanted attention and acts more of a spoiler than a winner. And we saw what happened with Ross Perot during the Clinton-George H.W. Bush election. But what I'm looking at actually is a person like Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney is the third most powerful Republican in Congress. She actually was a pragmatic ally of the president on issues like immigration and the border wall. Yet we saw how quickly she turned her back on the president during the impeachment without an investigation, and in my opinion, really affected the president's due process. She has had over half of Republican members of Congress today now vote to replace her, and she's actually been censured in her home state of Wyoming, which over 70% of the Republican voters there wanted President Trump. So I think that the Republican establishment or the Republican leaders today have to actually listen to their constituents. And what I think their constituents want is more America first and less globalism. And if they don't listen to their constituents, we're going to see a divided party that likely will have to create this new third party, if you will, which might negatively affect the voting and the potential for the Republican Party to reclaim power in 2022 and 2024. So I think the priority right now has to be focused on the next two elections, unifying the party and listening to the constituents which I think 75 million voters are very loud and